sleet stung Christine Kowalski's face until her skin felt flayed by weather alone, and still she kept pace beside Lady Whitcomb's carriage because the coachman had been told not to slow for her. Her right boot had split at the sole before they cleared the square at Holborn. Water seeped in with every step. Her left heel had already blistered raw, then gone numb. She carried Aurelia's hat box with both hands, fingers bare and red around polished leather, the lace veil inside packed in tissue as carefully as if it were a relic. Passing coaches rolled by in rattling bursts of mud and black wheel water. Gentlemen looked through rain-fogged glass. Ladies lifted gloved hands to the seal skin at their throats and watched the plain girl in a mended grey dress stumble in the gutter beside a crest-marked carriage. No one called for a stop. No one opened a door. At the next corner, Lady Whitcomb drew back the curtain just enough to inspect her, a hard oval face framed in lavender silk. "Do not lag. If that lace is ruined, you shall answer for it." The curtain fell. Christine adjusted her grip because the hat box had grown slippery in sleet, and walked on through the crush of carts and drays, while church bells counted the quarter hour over a city that had room for her labour, and no room at all for her dignity. By the time the towers of St. Bartholomew's emerged through the grey morning, prime had begun to ring, and each bell stroke seemed to land inside her ribs. Hunger had made her hands shake before dawn. The shaking worsened now. She had eaten half a crust in the attic kitchen 2 nights before, and nothing since, except weak tea gone cold in a chipped cup. Her chemise clung damp under her dress, linen rubbed thin at the collar where she had mended it 3 times, and the seam under her right arm had opened again from carrying baskets up too many flights of stairs. Lady Whitcomb had said she was fortunate to be given work suited to her station. The station had once been the Whitcomb Townhouse Library, where she had stood at her father's elbow and copied statutes by candlelight, while he explained the clean architecture of law. That room now held mirrored cabinets and French screens, and his books had gone by auction lot to men who never knew his hand had turned those pages. 2 winters had passed since his burial. In those winters his debts had multiplied on paper like mould in damp plaster. Her dowry had vanished into settlement schedules she had never been allowed to read. Firewood had been counted, then counted again, and her attic grate had remained black on nights when frost whitened the inside of her window. Bruises on her forearm from carrying coal hods too heavy for one person had been explained in drawing rooms as clumsiness. She had learned to stand very still when that word was spoken. She had also learned that endurance was easiest when cut into precise tasks. Fold, lift, scrub, account, conceal, survive. At the cathedral gate, footmen in livery descended first from Lady Whitcomb's carriage, and then from the second, where Aurelia and her sister Marcella sat wrapped in fur and satin with their cheeks bright from enclosed heat. Christine did not see Aurelia's eyes. She saw only the hem of ivory silk gathered out of the mud and handed down by 2 men, as if it were a person in itself. Marcella laughed at something beneath her breath, and the sound was light, practised and sharp enough to make Christine's stomach twist harder than hunger did. A verger opened the main doors for the bridal party. Incense and warm wax drifted out in a thin, expensive breath. Lady Whitcomb did not look at Christine when she spoke. "Service entrance. You will not come through the nave and shame us." Christine bowed her head once. "Yes, Lady Whitcomb." "Take the box to Mrs. Davies in the vestry. Then find a cloth and remove every trace of mud from the south steps. Guests are arriving. I will not have your footprints announcing our name." The rustle of silk moved away from her like a tide pulling from stone. She turned toward the side lane, where rainwater ran in a narrow channel beside the wall, and entered through a low door near the kitchens. The corridor smelled of wet wool, cabbage, and soap. She passed 2 scullery maids carrying copper pans. One gave her a glance that held quick pity and quicker fear of being seen giving it. Christine said nothing. She set the hat box on the vestry table, signed no ledger because none was offered to her, and returned for bucket, brush, and rag as instructed. The marble steps were wide enough for 6 gentlemen abreast, white veined with grey, and already tracked with carriage mud and horse grit. She knelt on the 3rd step and dipped the rag in water, gone cloudy after one pass. Cold climbed through her skirts into her knees. The stone bit through damp fabric until her joints ached with each shift of weight. She scrubbed in tight circles. She wrung cloth. She scrubbed again. Dark streaks thinned, then vanished. Another pair of boots crossed while she worked, leaving fresh marks she was expected to erase before anyone noticed them. A butler from another household paused at the top landing and waited for her to move farther aside before he led his employers inside. He did not meet her eye. A young couple passed under one umbrella, laughing softly, the woman's lavender gloves nearly the same shade as Lady Whitcomb's travelling mantle. Christine lowered her gaze to the stone. Her knuckles were split from lye and winter air, and the friction of rough cloth reopened the cracks until each rinse in cold water burned. She breathed through her mouth to steady the tremor in her jaw. Breath, stroke, turn, rinse. A routine, a private metronome. This was how she kept from shaking apart in public. The bells stopped. The city seemed to hold one wet, suspended breath, then resumed with the grind of wheels and the calls of coachmen. Somewhere beyond the wall a choir tested a chord and fell silent. As she worked the lower steps, memory came uninvited and exact. Her father's hand, ink-stained at the knuckle, guiding hers over a narrow legal script. The way he would tap once beside a clause and say, "Truth resides in what is written and what is omitted." She had been 15 then, serious and eager, dark hair braided too tightly by a mother already fading from illness. She had believed knowledge could defend a household. After his death, papers had arrived in neat packets, sealed and resealed. Lady Whitcomb had moved through those weeks in rose-water perfume and controlled sorrow, speaking of necessity, speaking of sacrifice, speaking of management beyond a girl's comprehension. Men with ledgers came and went. Christine was excluded from the room where accounts were reviewed. By spring, her father's study was emptied. By summer, her mother's silver comb set was sold. By autumn, Christine's trunks had been carried to the attic, and her meals shifted to kitchen leftovers after the family had dined. She had not challenged those first revisions quickly enough. She knew that now. She had also known enough to preserve what could still be saved. In the back scullery, beneath a flower chest with a warped lid, she kept 3 notebooks wrapped in oilcloth, her father's copied instruments, her own extracts from parish registries, and a list of figures that did not reconcile no matter how she recalculated them by candle end. No one searched the flower chest because no one imagined she had anything worth hiding. That error had become her narrow inheritance. On the 2nd week of March, she had begun copying names at night until her eyes blurred, because precision was the one form of resistance that did not leave a bruise visible by morning. Footsteps approached behind her, lighter than a man's, deliberate as a metronome. Marcella's voice arrived first. "Christine, you missed a streak!" Christine rose from her knees and stepped aside so the 2 young women could pass. Aurelia stood beside her cousin in ivory satin, veil not yet pinned, cheeks pale beneath powder, mouth set in a line too firm for a bride. For a moment Aurelia's gaze flicked to Christine's hands, to the reddened skin and the rag dripping grey water, then away. Lady Whitcomb followed, silk whispering over stone, perfume warm and floral in the damp air. She examined the steps as if inspecting a servant she had hired from a market and already regretted. "You are slow," she said. "If his lordship's family sees this entrance untidy, it will be attributed to my household." Christine bowed again, because open defiance served no purpose here. "I will finish before the next carriage, Lady Whitcomb." "You will finish before I count to 20. Marcella gave a soft laugh. Aurelia said nothing. The three of them moved toward the side chapel door, and Christine caught one last detail before they vanished inside. Aurelia's gloved fingers crushed white rose stems so tightly the petals bruised at their edges. Christine returned to the bucket. Her knees protested as she knelt again. She set the cloth to stone and worked faster, though speed made her fingertips throb and her breathing turned shallow. The sleet had become rain now, steadier and finer. It darkened loose strands of hair at her temples. It slid down the back of her neck, beneath her collar, and made her shiver so hard once that the bucket water sloshed over her wrist. When she finished the final tread, the marble shone in muted grey light, clean enough to reflect distorted shadows of passing hems. No one thanked her. A sacristan crossed without glancing down. Two gentlemen entered arguing over horses and never broke their stride. Christine carried the bucket back through the service corridor, emptied it by the drain, and hung the rag where it would not mildew before evening. Her stomach clenched so sharply she had to brace one hand against the wall for a moment until the wave passed. In the vestry, Mrs. Davies pressed a folded list into her palm without speaking. Lace pins, sealing wax, corrected banns from the clerk, marriage licence from the registrar's desk, all needed before noon. The housekeeper's eyes held hers for a fraction longer than duty required, then dropped to Christine's soaked sleeves. "Do not drip on the papers," she said quietly. Christine nodded and tucked the list into her cuff. From beyond the corridor came the low swell of organ pipes beginning the processional prelude, grand and hollow as winter wind through an empty house. She straightened, lifted her chin by habit rather than confidence, and stepped toward the antechamber where she would be sent next. The antechamber smelled of wet wool, beeswax, and expensive perfume forced to fight the rain. Footmen crossed with candelabra. A curate hurried past with a silver basin. Christine flattened herself against the wall to let a pair of ladies in violet silk pass through to the nave, their skirts brushing her damp sleeve as if she were part of the stone. Lady Whitcomb stood beside the vestry door, gloved hand resting on Aurelia's shoulder with the firmness of a clamp, while Marcella held up a length of lace and frowned at it as though the fault were moral. "You are late," Lady Whitcomb said when Christine reached them, though Christine had run half the corridor with the list still warm in her cuff. "The pins!" Christine passed them over. "The sealing wax." Christine passed that as well. Lady Whitcomb looked at Christine's skirt hem, dark with rainwater, and her lip curled a fraction. "You look like a dock child. Keep behind us. If anyone asks, your household staff hired this morning." Marcella laughed, quick and bright. Aurelia kept her eyes on the floor tiles, a white and black pattern that made her seem to float and vanish by turns. Christine moved to secure the veil where the maid's hand had shaken, and her fingers paused only once when she felt the comb at Aurelia's crown. Ivory carved with climbing roses, one prong repaired in silver wire by careful hands years ago. Her mother's comb. Lady Whitcomb had said it had been misplaced after the mourning year. Marcella had worn it at a winter musicale 2 months later. Christine fitted the veil around it without comment. Her throat tightened. She breathed once and lowered her hands. "Do not touch my sister's hair unless you are clean," Marcella said, though it was already done. "Your nails are rough." Lady Whitcomb did not rebuke her daughter. She only said, "Go to the clerk. The banns were amended at dawn. Bring the corrected sheet and stand by the pillar until called. Speak to no one unless spoken to." The command landed with the same practised cruelty as a slap delivered through linen, public enough to humiliate and deniable enough to preserve manners. Christine curtsied because refusal would cost her nothing and Aurelia everything. As she turned away, she caught in the polished brass of a wall sconce the reflection of her own face beside the bride's. Aurelia bright as a painted saint in ivory and seed pearls. Christine pale from hunger, dark hair pinned without ornament, mouth too stern for 23. Plain, they called her. Plain and useful. It had become a family article of faith, repeated often enough to pass as truth, and she had learned to wear it as one more coarse garment against weather. The passage to the clerk's office cut behind the south transept, where the cathedral stones held old cold even in June, and each step echoed with the loneliness of service corridors in grand houses. She knew that echo too well. After her mother's death, when she was 14 and still writing childish capitals in the margins of legal texts, her father had remarried within a year because grief had made him careless and illness had made him afraid of empty rooms. Lady Whitcomb had arrived with mourning ribbons exactly 2 shades softer than custom required, and daughters who understood drawing-room warfare before they understood kindness. At first she had smiled at Christine over the supper silver and called her "our serious scholar." She had asked to see the library accounts. She had praised Christine's penmanship. Then she had asked for keys. By Michaelmas of that first year she controlled the household books, the servants' schedules, and the invitations. By Candlemas she had moved Christine from her mother's chamber to the upper attic for peace. Christine passed the choir screen now and heard the organist test a low chord that trembled through her ribs. It reminded her of winter nights in the attic, the great cold, 3 blankets thin as paper, her breath visible in the moonlight while she copied columns by candle stubs and rubbed life back into numb fingers so ink would not blot. 2 winters had passed since her father's funeral, and the arithmetic of ruin had never once aligned. Debts that had been manageable while he lived became catastrophic on paper within weeks of his burial. Creditors appeared with instruments dated in his final illness, signatures crowded at odd angles, witnesses who had never set foot in their house before. Christine had asked to review the ledgers. Lady Whitcomb had smiled at her, as one smiles at a child playing magistrate, and said, "You mistake sentiment for aptitude." The library was sold by lot the next month. Men carried away calfskin volumes and folios, annotated in her father's narrow hand, while she stood in the doorway with a dust cloth and was told to make herself useful. "Mr. Gresham, the elderly verger stationed by the clerk's corridor, gave her one quiet look now and lowered his eyes to her wet sleeves. He had once seen her father lecture law students in their drawing-room. He said only, "The clerk has the amended paper ready, Miss Kowalski," giving her the title no one in her household used any more. The small mercy burned more sharply than insult. The clerk sat behind a walnut desk, under a leaded window, spectacles low on his nose, registry books stacked like altar stones around him. He did not invite her to sit. He did not offer fire, though the room held one. He took the Whitcomb calling card from her hand and slid the corrected bands across the blotter, keeping 2 fingers pressed to the lower edge until she produced the wax seal and signed receipt as instructed. "You write a legal hand," he said, watching the neat angle of her script. "Who trained you?" "My father, sir." His brows lifted at the surname. "Kowalski of Lincoln's Inn?" "Yes, sir." He hesitated, then pulled the receipt closer and read it again, as if Checking the letters might alter their meaning. "I heard he was a careful man." "He was." She waited, spine straight despite the ache from kneeling on stone. The clerk reached for a second document and then stopped himself. "The marriage licence remains with the registrar until the bride signs. Lady Whitcomb instructed me to collect it when released. Then she may send you again." His tone carried fatigue, not malice, yet dismissal still settled on her shoulders like wet wool. She took the banns and turned, only to find Marcella in the doorway with her chin lifted and her gloves immaculate. "There you are," Marcella said. "Mother says Aurelia is near tears because her train hem was creased. You are to bring fresh ribbon from the side chest." Her gaze dropped to the paper in Christine's hand. "Do not pretend those interest you." Christine tucked the sheet into the oilskin folder. "They interest everyone bound by them." Marcella's mouth thinned. "How solemn! You speak like a solicitor and dress like a scullion." She stepped aside with theatrical grace, and Christine passed without lowering her head. In the corridor she allowed herself one hard swallow against the old humiliation that never quite dulled. The day Marcella had taken her mother's blue cashmere shawl and called it a cast-off, the morning Aurelia had been given Christine's pianoforte, while Christine was assigned the coal scuttle, the evening her own dowry chest had been opened in the drawing-room and itemised as family assets, while she stood by the door holding a tea-tray. None of it had been done in secret. That was the method. Public erasure turned theft into etiquette. She had learned to answer by memorising figures, by preserving copies, by wrapping her father's notebooks in oilcloth and hiding them under flour where silk sleeves would never reach. By the second week after his burial, she had begun recording each inconsistency in a hand so small it looked like thread. A date altered. A witness repeated where he should not be. A sum rounded to convenience. She carried those entries now in her mind as if they were prayer. When Christine returned to the antechamber, the space had filled with voices pitched just below reverence, the kind that carried gossip farther than song. Lady Whitcomb stood in a circle of guests, describing delays as if they were the weather, and she its injured victim. "These church officials do not comprehend urgency," she said, loud enough for 3 pews to hear. "I have managed every detail myself." When she saw Christine, she held out her hand without breaking her smile. Christine placed the folder into her glove. Lady Whitcomb broke the seal, scanned the corrected bands, and the smile thinned. "Your cuff is wet. You have marked the margin." "The rain struck through in the corridor, Lady Whitcomb. The text remains legible." "Legible is not the standard for a wedding of consequence." She folded the paper with crisp precision, then looked past Christine to Aurelia, who stood by the pillar with her bouquet, and did not seem to feel the petals bruising under her grip. "Compose yourself," Lady Whitcomb said to her daughter in a whisper that still carried command. "You are fortunate beyond measure." Aurelia gave one tight nod. Her gaze slid to Christine for a heartbeat, frightened and pleading and ashamed all at once, then dropped again. Christine felt the old split in her chest. Loyalty dragged between justice and kinship until both bled. She would not expose Aurelia to cruelty for the sake of moral display. She would not let forged paper bind a life if she could stop it. The organ sounded a fuller prelude now. Rain tapped the high window panes like impatient fingers. "Mr. Gresham crossed with a message for the registrar, and Lady Whitcomb turned back to Christine with fresh irritation sharpened by ceremony. "The licence should be released within minutes. Go to the registrar's desk and wait. Do not return without it." Christine curtsied. Her knees trembled from cold and hunger, and a rage she kept banked behind her teeth. "Yes, Lady Whitcomb." As she moved toward the side door, a gust from the courtyard drove needles of rain through the crack in the frame and struck her face, and somewhere beyond the stone wall the cathedral clock began to count toward noon. The first strike rolled over the stone like iron dragged across slate, and at that same instant a cry cut through the corridor from the courtyard door, high and raw, and startled enough to stop 3 footmen mid-step with candles in their hands. Christine turned toward the sound and saw the side door fly inward on a gust of rain. A cathedral runner stumbled across the threshold, one hand to his cap, his face blanched. "Someone has fallen," he said to no one in particular, then looked straight at the nearest livery and repeated louder, "In the lower court. He struck the paving." No one moved. One footman glanced toward the nave where the processional had begun to gather. Another looked toward Lady Whitcomb as if waiting for rank to authorize mercy. The second bell struck. Christine had already taken 2 steps when Lady Whitcomb appeared from the antechamber, silk skirts lifted from the wet and eyes bright with controlled fury. She caught Christine's sleeve in a hard grip and pulled her close enough that rose water and lavender drowned out the smell of rain. "Leave him, Christine, and fetch the marriage license," the whisper held steel. "You will do one useful thing correctly today." Beyond Lady Whitcomb's shoulder, Aurelia stood under the arch in ivory and pearl, white roses trembling in her gloved hand, her face almost the same colour as her gown. The cry came again from the courtyard, thinner now. "Please, help him." The third bell struck. Christine looked at Lady Whitcomb's hand on her sleeve, then at the corridor of men trained to obey and standing still. Hunger hollowed her, cold stiffened her knees, and fear warned her what defiance would cost. Instinct moved anyway. She slipped from Lady Whitcomb's grasp, ran through the open door into sleet and rain, and crossed the slick stones where water streamed from gargoyles in silver ropes. A young stable groom lay twisted beside the wheel rut, his cap several feet away, one arm caught under him at a wrong angle, while a smaller chorister in a drenched surplice knelt nearby, shaking so violently his teeth clicked. "He would not wake," the chorister said, voice breaking. Christine dropped to her knees in water and grit. "Look at me," she told the groom, touching his shoulder. His eyes fluttered open and shut. Blood from a cut at his temple had run into his brow and mingled with rain. Not much, enough to alarm. His breathing came fast, shallow, frightened. "Do not move your arm." She shrugged off her thin shawl and pressed the cleanest fold against his temple, then reached behind her without looking. "Ribbon! I need ribbon!" The chorister stared at her, frozen. Christine tore 2 lengths from her own cuff ties, then heard steps and saw an attendant at the doorway with a bundle of veil stays and spare bridal ribbon clutched to her chest, face set and unreadable. She tossed the ribbon down without a word. Christine used 2 flat stays from the bridal parcel, set them along the groom's forearm, and wrapped carefully, firm enough for support, loose enough for swelling. The groom hissed through his teeth and tried to pull away. "No," she said, "you keep still. You will keep still if you wish to use that hand next week." Her own hands shook from cold and hunger so badly she had to brace her wrists against his coat to tie the final knot. The 4th bell struck. Voices rose behind her. Guests had reached the cloister and gathered under stone arches to watch the plain stepdaughter of Lady Whitcomb kneeling in the rain, with her skirts dark to the thigh and blood on her fingers. Lady Whitcomb's voice carried from the doorway, low and vicious now that witnesses were present. "Get up at once. You are making a spectacle." Christine did not look back. She spoke to the chorister instead. "Hold this shawl here. Press, but gently. Do not lift it to check." The boy obeyed with both hands, eyes enormous. Christine leaned close to the groom. "Can you tell me your name?" "Thomas," he breathed. "Thomas Reed." "Good. Stay with me, Mr. Reed. You are heard. You are seen. Help is coming." She rose halfway, rain running from her hair into her eyes, and called toward the corridor where rank still held men motionless. "Fetch the physician now. Bring a litter or two strong men and a board, not a carriage seat. His arm is broken." One of the footmen flinched as if struck by the certainty in her tone. He started to move. Lady Whitcomb stepped down one stair, silk catching at the wet edge, and said through her smile, "Return inside, immediately." Christine turned then, breathing hard, the shawl still red-marked where her hand pressed it. "The licence can wait 5 minutes. His skull cannot." The 5th bell struck over the courtyard, and the sound seemed to split the morning cleanly in two. The man who answered did not come from the corridor. He came from the gate with rain on his greatcoat and 2 grooms at his back, and the courtyard altered around his presence as if stone itself had been waiting for his weight. Christine knew him at once, though she had never stood this near. Everyone in London knew the outline of Lord Ashford by rumour before they knew his face. Widower at 32, estates spread from Kent to the northern fells, a name spoken in Parliament with caution and in drawing-rooms with curiosity sharpened by fear. In person he seemed larger than gossip, tall and broad-shouldered, dark hair wet against his temples, jaw carved hard enough to look unforgiving even in stillness. He stopped 3 paces from her and took in the scene in a single sweep. Groom on the stones, chorister with shaking hands, bridal ribbon bound to a splint, Christine kneeling in soaked grey with her fingers stained and trembling. His signet ring flashed once when he removed his glove, the Ashford crest deep-cut and unmistakable. The power between them was immediate and brutal. He wore command like a second coat. She wore reign and someone else's blood. "Stand aside," he said. The words were not loud. They carried all the same. Christine held his gaze because Thomas Reed whimpered when she shifted pressure from the wound. "He cannot be moved." His eyes, the colour of winter water under cloud, narrowed a fraction. "You disobey quickly." She tightened the shawl against the cut, rainwater running down her sleeve. "Only when a child is bleeding, my lord." The chorister made a tiny sound at that, half sob and half prayer. Ashford looked down at him, then back to Christine's hands, to the precise knot at the splint, to the tremor she could not hide. Lady Whitcomb descended into the court with Aurelia and Marcella behind her, all lace and outrage, and dropped into a curtsy deep enough to signal rank while preserving control. "My lord, forgive this disturbance. My stepdaughter has no sense of proportion. The ceremony is delayed and she has abandoned her instructions regarding the licence." Ashford did not turn his head toward Lady Whitcomb. "Physician," he said to one of his men. "Now!" The groom ran. "Firebox from my carriage. Dry blankets. Bring both." The second groom hesitated, glancing at Lady Whitcomb as if uncertain whose authority governed the square. Ashford's voice cut colder. "Move!" The man moved at once. Only then did Ashford address Lady Whitcomb, still without looking fully at her. "If the ceremony is delayed, it is delayed by rain and stone, not by competence." Marcella inhaled sharply. Aurelia swayed where she stood, roses bent in her fist. Christine felt the cold in her knees turning to deep ache, but she kept pressure steady on Thomas's temple, while the courtyard watched a hierarchy crack by a hair's breadth. By the time the 6th bell began, the physician arrived at a run, with his satchel banging his thigh. He knelt opposite Christine, touched the groom's wrist, examined pupils, nodded once. "Good compression, good splinting. We can move him with care." Ashford crouched then, coat darkening in the rain, and held the board steady while two men lifted Thomas. His face did not change, but his hands were exact and controlled, a soldier's hands. When the litter rose and the groom gave a hoarse cry, Ashford said, "Easy! You are safe!" The words were clipped, almost severe, yet Thomas's breathing eased at once. Christine sat back on her heels only after the litter passed through the arch, and when she did, the courtyard tilted briefly at the edges from hunger and cold. She set one palm on wet stone until the dizziness passed. Ashford rose and turned to her. Up close there was a pale scar near his left temple, half hidden by rain-damp hair. "Your name," he said. "Christine Kowalski." "Relation to Lady Whitcomb." "Stepdaughter." The smallest pause. His gaze dropped to her raw knuckles, to the reopened cracks and the shake she still could not still. "You are freezing!" "I am sent for the license, my lord." "You are sent nowhere until you can stand without swaying." Heat touched her face despite the rain. "I can stand!" She tried and managed it, though her wet skirts dragged and her left knee buckled once before she locked it straight. His mouth shifted, not quite a smile, something harder and more surprised. "Stubborn is not strength when the body is failing." He took the firebox from his groom and set it on the cloister ledge near her hands. "Warm them." Christine hesitated. Lady Whitcomb stepped forward, smile sharpened, thin as wire. "My lord, she overstates every discomfort. She is quite accustomed to work. If she would simply do as instructed, we might proceed without theatrics." Ashford looked at Christine's sleeves, her mended cuff, the water streaming from hem to boot, and then at Lady Whitcomb. "I did not request your assessment." Silence dropped heavy as wet wool. Marcella stared at the paving. Aurelia looked from one face to the other with panic bright in her eyes. The chorister, forgotten by everyone else, edged closer to Christine and whispered, "Will Thomas live?" Christine crouched to his height despite the protest in her knees. "Yes, he has a broken arm and a cut. He will curse for 2 weeks and boast for 10 years. The boy almost smiled. Ashford watched that exchange without speaking, rain ticking off the stone between them. A cathedral official hurried into the court with a ledger pressed to his chest. "My Lord Ashford, the registrar asks for the bride's signature at once." Ashford nodded once and removed his wet glove again. "Then we go." His gaze returned to Christine. "You found the corrected banns?" "Yes, my lord, delivered to Lady Whitcomb." "And the licence?" "Not yet released to her hand." Lady Whitcomb cut in quickly. "Because she abandoned her post." Christine kept her voice level. "Because the registrar required the bride first, Lady Whitcomb. That was stated in the clerk's office." Ashford's eyes moved between them, weighing tone as much as words. He extended his hand, palm up, not to Christine but to the official. "Bring the licence to the vestry after signing." "No paper leaves my sight until the vows are complete." The official blinked, startled, then bowed. "Yes, my lord." Lady Whitcomb's fan snapped open, though there was no heat to justify it. "That is highly irregular." Ashford settled his glove back onto his hand with deliberate care. "So is rain in June. We adapt." He turned to Christine again, and his next words were quieter, meant for her and yet audible to anyone listening. "You will come inside, dry your hands, then stand where I can see you." The command was absolute. The reason beneath it was not. Christine felt the shift in the gathered crowd, that subtle recalculation when a powerful man marked a person no one else had been required to notice. Fear pricked along her skin with the rain. So did a strange steadiness, reluctant and unwelcome, because he had looked at her and named facts instead of convenient lies. She wrapped her arms around herself, once against the cold and inclined her head. "As you wish, my lord." Ashford stepped toward the arch, then stopped and looked back at Lady Whitcomb, who had begun shepherding Aurelia forward with urgent fingers. "No one addresses Miss Kowalski as staff again," he said. "Not in this cathedral." The line landed like a struck bell. Lady Whitcomb's face held its social smile by force. "Of course, my lord." He moved on, boots ringing against stone, and the party followed toward the vestry where organ notes climbed, and the clock, now past noon by 3 minutes, counted each delay as if time itself had become evidence. The vestry door closed behind them on a rush of damp air, and organ thunder and heat from 2 braziers struck Christine's face so suddenly that her skin burned. The room was narrow and crowded with polished wood, trays of pins, a silver ewer, and the thick, sweet smell of sealing wax melted too often in too little space. Servants moved in lines that never touched. Bridesmaids hovered at the edges like pale birds. Aurelia stood at the registrar's table with rain on her veil and white roses gone limp in her hand. Christine stopped where the flagstone changed from corridor slate to vestry tile. Water fell from her hem in a dark crescent. She tucked her raw fingers under her sleeves to hide the shaking. Lord Ashford removed his gloves and gave them to his valet without looking away from the table. "Dry your hands," he said. It was addressed to her, though he stood 3 yards away. Lady Whitcomb heard it and stiffened. A vestry maid appeared with a folded linen cloth and did not meet anyone's eye as she pressed it into Christine's palms. "By the brazier, miss," she murmured, low enough to be deniable. Christine moved to the coals. Heat licked her knuckles. The reopened cracks stung so sharply her breath caught in her throat. She held the cloth around her fingers until the trembling eased enough to fold and unfold linen without dropping it. Behind her, the registrar cleared his throat and arranged the documents in one exact stack. "Lady Aurelia Whitcomb," he said, "your signature is required here and here." Aurelia stepped forward. Her gloved hand left a damp print on the table edge. She looked at her mother once. Lady Whitcomb gave the smallest nod, smile fixed, fan closed, like a blade in her hand. "Steady," Lady Whitcomb said softly. Aurelia signed the first line. The pen scratched. She reached the second and paused. Christine saw the pause because she watched hands now before faces. Hands betrayed what mouths concealed. Aurelia's fingers tightened around the pen until her knuckles blanched under kid leather. Lord Ashford spoke without warmth. "If you require another moment, take it." Lady Whitcomb answered before Aurelia could. "My daughter is prepared, my lord." Aurelia bent and signed. The registrar blotted both signatures and turned the page toward Lord Ashford. He wrote quickly a hard, slanted script that pressed through the paper. Witness lines followed. Marcella leaned in, eager, and the registrar lifted his palm. "1 witness from each household," he said, "as listed in the amended banns." Lady Whitcomb's eyes moved at once to Christine. "Then she will sign for ours." Marcella made a small sound of disbelief. "Mother!" "She is present," Lady Whitcomb said, "and she has handled these papers all morning." Christine felt the room shift toward her, not in welcome, in calculation. She stepped from the brazier, cloth still in hand. The registrar frowned. "The listed witness is Lady Marcella Whitcomb." "An error of clerical haste," Lady Whitcomb replied. "Miss Kowalski witnessed the exchange with the clerk." It was not true. Christine had stood alone at the desk. Marcella had arrived afterward and spoken only scorn. The lie was narrow, almost elegant. A minor substitution, a practical convenience. That was how large frauds survived, she knew, stitched from small denials no one wished to contest before noon prayers. Lord Ashford glanced toward Christine. His face gave nothing. "Did she witness it?" Lady Whitcomb's voice sharpened by half a tone. She did? Christine looked at Aurelia. The bride had lowered her eyes to the roses, crushing petals against her palm. A red mark from a thorn had risen beneath the glove seam at her wrist. She looked less like a bride than a girl trying to stand still through a winter fever. The registrar dipped his pen and held it out toward Christine. "Miss Kowalski!" Lady Whitcomb turned her head just enough to show only Christine the warning in her eyes. "Sign," she said, smiling at everyone else. Christine did not take the pen. "I cannot." Silence struck the room hard enough that even the organ seemed to recede for one suspended beat. Lady Whitcomb's smile held by force. "Do not perform modesty. You are able to write." "I am able," Christine said. "That is why I cannot sign a false attestation." Marcella hissed her name. Aurelia flinched as if the sound had touched skin. Lady Whitcomb's fan snapped open and shut once. "You are exhausted. You mistake formal language. The household is one." "The statement is not." The registrar's eyes moved between them, uncertainty turning to discomfort. He looked toward Lord Ashford as men in offices always did when rank and irregularity collided in the same square foot of air. Lord Ashford did not rescue anyone from the moment. He folded his hands behind his back and waited. Lady Whitcomb stepped closer to Christine, voice still low, still polished. "You will not obstruct this ceremony over a clerk's phrasing." Christine felt the cloth in her hands, damp and rough. She felt the old fear rise, cold and familiar, the fear of what came later behind closed doors when public obedience failed. She swallowed it. "The phrasing is an oath." Lady Whitcomb's eyes flashed. "You forget your place." Christine met her gaze for the first time that day, without lowering her own. "My place does not alter what I saw." Aurelia made a broken movement, half toward them, then stopped when her mother's shoulder shifted in warning. Lord Ashford turned his head slightly, just enough to mark that exchange. He said nothing. The registrar set the pen down with care. "My lady, I require a valid witness, not a disputed one." Marcella stepped forward immediately. "Then I will sign as listed." Lady Whitcomb caught her wrist. "No." It was one word and nearly a command. The room heard it. The curate by the door looked up sharply. Mrs. Davies, arranging ribbon near the chest, froze with both hands in the air. Christine understood then why the substitution mattered. Marcella could not sign, not if the amended banns contained what the clerk had corrected at dawn, not if a signature would bind her to a declaration that could be checked line by line against parish records. Lady Whitcomb needed a witness she could later discredit as confused, clumsy, low-born in habit, if not in blood. She needed Christine's name where truth would soon be tested. Lord Ashford's voice cut through the silence. "Why not your daughter, Lady Whitcomb?" The fan trembled once in Lady Whitcomb's hand. "Marcella has had no sleep. She is unwell." "I am standing," Marcella said, startled into honesty. Lady Whitcomb did not look at her. "You will be quiet." Aurelia lifted her head. "Mother, please." The plea was small. It still changed the air. Lady Whitcomb's gaze snapped to Aurelia and softened into practised concern so quickly it looked rehearsed. "You are overwrought, darling. Sit. Drink water." "I do not want water." Aurelia's voice shook. "I want this done correctly." Christine stared at her cousin. Aurelia had not spoken plainly in months, perhaps years. The words cost her. That much was visible in the tremor at her mouth. Lady Whitcomb moved as if to touch her, and Aurelia stepped back one pace. White roses brushed the table edge and shed 3 bruised petals onto the licence. The registrar drew the paper away from the damp petals, and blotted the marks with unnecessary care. "My lord, I cannot proceed until the witness line is properly executed." Lord Ashford nodded once. "Then execute it properly." His tone was neutral. His eyes were not. They were fixed on Christine's face with a concentration that felt less like scrutiny than testimony, as though he were memorizing not what she said, but what she refused to say. Lady Whitcomb abandoned softness. "Christine, you will sign now." "No. You are fed by my table." "Not today." Colour rose in Lady Whitcomb's cheeks. "You insolent girl!" Christine's hands trembled again. She folded them tighter around the cloth so no one would see. "I will not swear to what is untrue." "Then swear to this," Lady Whitcomb said, stepping close enough that the scent of rosewater turned cloying. "You received the age declaration directly from me yesterday morning, complete and correct." Christine heard blood in her ears. There it was, not implied now, asked in plain words. A direct lie tied to a specific paper. She answered just as plainly. "I did not." Marcella stared at her, stunned. Aurelia closed her eyes. The registrar exhaled through his nose and looked down at the ledger with the expression of a man who had hoped to complete his duty and go home before dinner. "My lady, this is now a matter for notation." Lady Whitcomb rounded on him. "Notation of what? A servant's confusion?" Christine spoke before she could stop herself. "I am not confused, and I am not your servant." The words landed and could not be recalled. Heat flooded Christine's face. She had crossed a line visible to everyone in the room. Lady Whitcomb's expression smoothed into something colder than anger. Then perhaps Miss Kowalski would prefer to explain her certainty to a magistrate. "I would." The answer came from Lord Ashford, not Christine. He stepped to the table and placed one hand on the licence, covering the witness line with his broad palm. "Send for the magistrate assigned to cathedral jurisdiction," he said to the curate at the door. "At once." Lady Whitcomb gave a short laugh that broke at the edges. "My lord, this is absurd. Guests are seated, families are waiting. You would halt a marriage over household insolence. I would halt a legal instrument over disputed declarations. It will ruin Aurelia." Aurelia spoke without lifting her eyes. "It already has." The room went still. Christine had never heard such desolation in her cousin's voice. Not weeping, not hysteria. Something flatter, emptied out by long obedience. Lord Ashford looked at Aurelia for a long second, then back to the curate. "Go!" The curate went. 3 minutes passed in tight silence while rain ticked at the leaded panes, and the organ searched for a hymn no one now moved to sing. By the second minute, 2 senior guests had drifted toward the vestry threshold under pretence of concern. By the third, the rumour had already begun its work in the nave. One could feel it in the changing cadence of distant whispers. Lady Whitcomb mastered herself enough to sit. She arranged her skirts and spoke as if discussing weather. "Christine is overtired. She has always romanticised legal language. Her late father encouraged theatrical seriousness." Christine swallowed grief like ground glass and said nothing. Lord Ashford answered for her. "Her late father trained her accurately." Lady Whitcomb's eyes narrowed. "You knew him." "I read him." That was all he gave. It was enough to shift the footing again. When the magistrate arrived, he brought rain on his coat and impatience in his stride, a compact man with grey at his temples and ink on his cuff. He bowed to rank, listened to the registrar's summary, and asked for each statement separately. Lady Whitcomb spoke first, smooth and indignant. Marcella echoed her in shorter lines, avoiding details. Aurelia hesitated and looked to her mother. Lady Whitcomb's fan moved once, The magistrate noticed. "Lady Aurelia, look at me when you answer." Aurelia did. Her lips trembled. "I signed what was placed before me." "Did you verify the age declaration attached to the licence?" A pause, then quiet and clear. "No, sir." "Did Miss Kowalski witness your mother deliver that declaration yesterday morning?" Aurelia's hands tightened on the ruined roses. "I do not know. I was not in the room." Lady Whitcomb cut in. "She was preparing for her wedding. She cannot be expected to track servants." The magistrate turned to Christine. "Miss Kowalski, state exactly what you handled." She did. No flourishes, no accusation beyond what she could name, corrected banns received from clerk, licence withheld pending bride's signature. No age declaration delivered by Lady Whitcomb in Christine's presence at any point yesterday morning. Marcella present only later in corridor. Christine heard her own voice grow steadier as it moved through facts, as if language itself were a rail she could hold. The magistrate asked for corroboration. Mr. Gresham was summoned from the corridor. He confirmed Christine had collected banns alone. The clerk was called from his office and confirmed the same. The curate confirmed that Lady Whitcomb had demanded immediate witness substitution inside the vestry. None of them volunteered more than necessary. None lied. Lady Whitcomb rose. "This is a conspiracy of servants and old men who resent female management." The magistrate did not react. "My lady, mind your terms. Miss Kowalski is named in household records as kin." Lady Whitcomb's mouth tightened. "A burdensome relation." Christine felt that line like an old bruise pressed with a thumb. It no longer surprised. It still hurt. Lord Ashford finally spoke again, each word measured. "Provide the original declaration packet." Lady Whitcomb held his gaze. "It is in my carriage." "Then we will retrieve it." She did not move. Lord Ashford looked to his valet. "Go with 2 cathedral officers." Lady Whitcomb stepped forward quickly. "No one enters my carriage unescorted." The magistrate answered this time. "Then escort us yourself." She had no ground left and knew it. Silk whispered as she turned. Marcella followed, pale now, fan shaking in her hand. Aurelia remained by the table, unmoving, white veil drifting against her shoulder like surrender. Christine stood where she was told, near the brazier, cloth still in her fingers. She had not eaten, her knees ached, her wet hem clung cold to her calves. She should have felt triumph. She felt only a thin thread of relief and a heavier dread for what would follow once doors closed and witnesses dispersed. Lord Ashford crossed to the far side of the room and stopped beside the window, giving her space and yet not removing himself from her line of sight. He did not speak. He did not look away when she looked up. It was a strange kind of steadiness, severe and unadorned, and she hated that she drew strength from it. Rain thickened against the panes. Somewhere beyond the vestry, the cathedral clock marked the 1/4 hour. The marriage hymn faltered in the nave and fell silent entirely. 10 minutes later the door opened and Lady Whitcomb returned with the packet in her hand, her expression composed and almost serene. The magistrate held out his palm. She placed the packet into it. He broke the seal. Wax cracked under the magistrate's thumb and fell in red flakes onto the vestry table. He drew out 3 folded sheets, 1 affidavit, 1 age declaration, 1 debt schedule attached by narrow blue ribbon. He read the first in silence. His mouth flattened. He held the second closer to the brazier light. "Registrar," he said, "come here." The registrar stepped in, spectacles low, hands already ink-stained from the morning. The magistrate passed him the age declaration without commentary. The registrar read, blinked, and looked again at the date line where a number had been written, over and scraped thin. "This hand does not match the primary entry," he said carefully. Lady Whitcomb gave a short breath that tried to become a laugh. "It is a clerical correction. You see irregularity because you wish to justify this farce." The magistrate did not look at her. "Who made this correction?" "The parish clerk at St. Jude's," she said at once. The registrar touched the lower margin with one finger. "No clerk of St. Jude's uses this mark. Their office notation is a cross stroke. This is a private amendment." Marcella shifted near the door, fan trembling against her skirt. Aurelia stood motionless, veil damp at the shoulders, roses collapsing one petal at a time in her hand. The magistrate unfolded the debt schedule and read the witness line. His gaze lifted to Christine. "Miss Kowalski, you said your father kept copies of household instruments." Christine felt every eye in the room turn toward her like weight. She had not told him about the flower chest. She had only spoken of what she handled that morning. Yet her father's habit was known among legal men. Careful men recognized other careful men by the architecture of their records. "Yes, sir," she said. "He kept copies when lending against family settlements." "Do you possess one relevant to this packet?" Lady Whitcomb snapped. "She possesses nothing." "Her father's papers were liquidated lawfully." Christine heard Ashford move one step nearer the table. Cloth whispered. Boots settled. He spoke without raising his voice. "Answer the magistrate. It was not permission. It was shelter given the shape of command." Christine swallowed. "I possess extracts, sir, not originals." "Where?" "In my satchel," she said. "In the service corridor chest." Lady Whitcomb turned on her colour rising. "You stole legal papers from my house." Christine faced her and kept her tone level. "I copied them when they were still my father's papers in his own library." Ashford's eyes cut to Lady Whitcomb. "You will lower your voice." The words were quiet. They froze the room more effectively than a shout. The magistrate sent the curate for the satchel and waited in absolute stillness while rain worked at the windows and distant whispers from the nave thickened into open rumour. No one sat. No one touched the refreshments set out for a wedding feast that had become an inquiry table. By the time the cathedral clock struck 1, the satchel lay open beside the licence. Oilcloth bundles, a narrow notebook, 2 copied instruments in Christine's fine, compressed hand. The magistrate read in silence. He compared signatures. He compared dates. He compared the debt amount in her father's older copy with the inflated figure in Lady Whitcomb's packet. "Difference of £800, he said at last. Lady Whitcomb's chin lifted. "Interest accrues." "Not at this rate, not on this term, and not with a dead lender's signature added 6 months after burial." Her composure fissured. "You accuse me of forgery in a vestry before witnesses? Over household bookkeeping?" Aurelia made a sound then, small and unbreaking. "It was never bookkeeping." No one moved. Even Marcella stared at her sister. Aurelia's voice shook, but she did not stop. "You told me if I delayed this marriage, you would put Christine in debtor confinement for father's obligations. You said Ashford demanded immediate terms. You said there was no other lawful path." Lady Whitcomb spun toward her. "You are overwrought. Be silent." Aurelia flinched. Ashford took one step between them without touching either woman. "Lady Aurelia," he said, clipped and formal, "did I ever convey such a demand to you?" She looked up at him through wet veil lace. "No, my lord." "Did I threaten Miss Kowalski with confinement?" "No." The magistrate exhaled once, slow. "That will be entered." Lady Whitcomb's fan snapped shut hard enough to crack one rib. "This is coercion by humiliation. You will destroy my daughter's reputation in full cathedral view." Ashford's face did not change. "Your acts endangered it already." Outside the door, movement gathered. 2 cathedral officers had arrived at the corridor threshold, hats in hand, waiting for instruction. The magistrate saw them and gave one brief nod. "Remain nearby," he said. "No one leaves the precinct until statements are complete." Lady Whitcomb stared at the officers, then back at the table where the documents lay, spread like wounds open to air. For the first time that day, fear showed clearly in her eyes. The registrar cleared his throat. "My lord, without a valid declaration, I cannot lawfully execute the licence in this form. The marriage must be postponed pending correction." Whispers from the nave surged again, louder now. Guests had waited an hour past noon. Carriages packed the lane. Families from 2 counties sat in pews while candles burned down to stubs. The magistrate answered before Ashford could. Postponement in open scandal places Lady Aurelia at immediate social peril while inquiry proceeds. There is an alternative. Proceed with ecclesiastical vows under bans already corrected, with notation that property and settlement terms are held in trust until fraud review is complete. The registrar hesitated. "It is irregular." "It is lawful," said the magistrate, "and it protects the woman least responsible in this room." Aurelia stared at him as if she had not expected the law to notice her at all. Ashford gave one curt nod. "Then we proceed." Lady Whitcomb stepped forward. "No, if any vows are spoken, they will be spoken cleanly, with full settlements recognised." Ashford turned to her at last, fully, and the cold in his expression carried the force of a barred gate. "You have mistaken this morning from its first minute," he said. "You are no longer setting terms." The line landed like struck iron. The procession to the altar happened without music. The organist's hands hovered but did not play. Guests rose in confusion as the vestry door opened and the bridal party emerged out of order, faces stripped of ceremony. Christine walked last, as instructed by the magistrate, carrying the copied extracts in both hands. Wet hem, raw knuckles, no ornament. She felt the congregation's stare move over her like sleet on skin. Aurelia and Ashford stood before the chancel rail. The priest opened the prayer book and waited. Ashford spoke first when prompted. His voice carried to the back pews, steady and unadorned. "I take this vow under God and law to safeguard Lady Aurelia's person, name, and rightful estate, while truth is entered and coercion is judged." A stir went through the nave. It was not the language anyone had expected. It was not a lover's declaration. It was a shield built out of oath. Aurelia answered in a voice thin but clear, "I take this vow freely." Christine watched from the side aisle and understood then what he had chosen. Not romance in front of witnesses, not retreat. He had chosen structure, time, legal ground no one could revoke by shouting. When the vows ended, no one applauded. The signing took place in terse silence. The priest closed the book. The magistrate reopened his ledger. Officers moved toward the vestry corridor. Lady Whitcomb attempted to leave by the north transept. An officer stepped in her path with a respectful bow and an unyielding hand. "By order of the court, my lady." She turned back, silk hissing over stone, and her gaze found Christine across the aisle. Hatred there was old, practiced, almost intimate. Christine had seen that look in mirror glass, in dining room reflections, in doorway shadows. It no longer made her lower her eyes. Back in the vestry, statements resumed. Pages filled. Witnesses entered one by one. Mr. Gresham, the clerk, the chorister who had seen Thomas fall and had seen Christine kneel, Mrs. Davies, who confirmed Lady Whitcomb's demand for substitution, Marcella, pale and brittle, who tried twice to evade direct answer and was brought back each time by the magistrate's short, patient questions. Aurelia, who wept once, wiped her face at once, and continued without wavering. Christine stood through all of it, near the brazier gone low. Heat had faded. Damp cold returned through her sleeves and into her bones. Adrenaline ebbed. Hunger came back as pain, sharp and hollow. She pressed her thumb into the centre of her palm to stay upright. Ashford remained beside the table from the first deposition to the last. He did not sit. He did not eat when trays were offered. He did not remove his coat, though rain had soaked it through. He answered when asked. He observed when not. At intervals his gaze moved to Christine's hands, her posture, the slight sway she fought each time she shifted weight. Late in the 4th hour, the magistrate asked for the original notebook copy one final time. Christine stepped forward and nearly missed the edge of the rug where water had curled the corner. Her balance tipped. Ashford's hand closed around her wrist before she struck the table, not hard, firm, exact. He kept hold until she steadied, then looked down at her fingers where the skin at each knuckle had split again. "Stop standing in the cold," he said, low enough that only those nearest heard. "You are under my protection now." The words were simple. They were not reversible. Christine stared at him. Protection had always been a promise made elsewhere, to other women in warmer rooms. Never to her, never in plain terms, never before witnesses who could carry it beyond denial. Her throat constricted. She managed, "My lord, I can remain." "I did not ask." He drew a chair from the wall with his free hand and set it beside the brazier. Command disguised nothing now. It was care with rank stripped from it. He waited until she sat. Only then did he release her wrist, and even then his hand remained on the chair back, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through wet wool and air. Statements continued. Ink dried. Wax cooled. Outside, rain thinned to mist, then returned in short, hard bursts against leaded glass. One officer departed with sealed copies for the court. Another remained by the door. Lady Whitcomb was formally charged before dusk with instrument forgery, coercive fraud, and false declaration in ecclesiastical proceeding. She attempted one final speech about maternal duty and social preservation. The magistrate recorded it and did not alter the charge. When officers moved to escort her out, she twisted once toward Aurelia. "You ungrateful child!" Aurelia did not answer. She stood beside Christine's chair with both hands clasped and watched her mother pass as one watches a carriage disappear in fog, knowing only that it is going away. Marcella followed in stunned silence, no longer beautiful in the way salons praised, only young and frightened and suddenly ordinary. The vestry emptied in layers, guests dispersed, servants carried out untouched confections and wilted flowers. The candles at the mirror had burned low enough to gutter. Christine rose when the final signature was taken. Her knees buckled again, smaller this time, a private failure she hoped no one saw. Ashford saw. He offered his hand, palm up, waiting. She placed her hand in his, because refusing now would have been theatre and she had no strength left for performance. His fingers closed around hers and stayed there while the magistrate sanded the last page and sealed the deposition packet. He remained still beside her through the final formalities, unmoving as carved stone, and when the clock told the 6th hour past noon, he was still there, his hand warm around hers. As if the vows spoken in public had been one matter, and this unadorned vigil beside a half-dead brazier was the first honest one. When the magistrate pressed his seal into the final wax and lifted it clean, the room released one breath at last, and Christine felt Lord Ashford's grip tighten once around her hand as if he had heard her bones begin to shake. The magistrate stacked the papers with ritual care. The original declaration packet, the altered debt schedule, and Miss Kowalski's copied extracts are entered as evidence. He looked to the registrar. You will log chain of custody now in ink before these witnesses disperse. The registrar opened a fresh page and wrote each item aloud as he entered it. 1 sealed packet recovered from Lady Whitcomb's possession, 1 age declaration with visible amendment, 1 debt instrument with disputed signature, 3 notebook extracts in the hand of Christine Kowalski, 1 clerk's correction note from Dawn Banns, 1 witness roll signed by attending officers. Christine watched each line form. Her father had taught her that records failed when men relied on memory. Tonight no one relied on memory. Mrs. Davies stepped forward with Christine's satchel, oilcloth bundles folded back inside. Miss, your strap is torn, she said quietly. I tied it with kitchen twine. It was the nearest thing to tenderness Christine had received all day. She nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Davies. The housekeeper gave her one loaded look, full of old knowledge and no surprise, then said what she had perhaps wished to say for years. Your father would have stood proud in this room. Her eyes shone once. She turned away before anyone else could mark it. By the time the cathedral clock struck 7, the nave had emptied to echoes and damp stone. Officers escorted Lady Whitcomb and Marcella through the side aisle, not dragged, not touched beyond protocol, the humiliation complete precisely because it remained formal. At the threshold, Lady Whitcomb stopped and looked back at Christine, rage bright and useless. This is your doing! Christine held her gaze. No, Lady Whitcomb, it is yours. Lady Whitcomb was led on. Marcella paused a fraction behind her mother and met Christine's eyes with an expression that had never belonged to the drawing-room version of Marcella. Fear, exhaustion, a reluctant surrender to fact. I saw her change the number, she whispered, so low only Christine heard, the night before the banns. Then she followed the officers and did not look back again. Aurelia stood by the extinguished altar, with her veil unpinned, the repaired ivory comb still fixed at her crown. In the dim light she looked younger and older than her years. Ashford released Christine's hand only when Aurelia crossed to him. He did not step close. He gave her distance and rank both. My lord, Aurelia said, voice rough from holding too much silence, I will submit a sworn petition that this ceremony was procured by coercion and false declaration. He inclined his head. You will have counsel from my chambers until judgment enters. You owe me nothing. I owe the truth its full completion. Aurelia turned to Christine then. The white roses were gone. Her hands were empty. I took your mother's comb and wore it while you scrubbed the steps. Her throat worked once. I told myself I had no choice in anything, and so I took what was easy to take. I was wrong in both. She reached up, removed the comb, and placed it in Christine's palm. One prong still held the old silver wire repair. Christine had done that repair at 17 by candlelight. The metal was warm from Aurelia's hair. I'm sorry, Aurelia said. Christine closed her fingers around the ivory. Tell it to the court exactly as you told it here. I will. The next morning rain gave way to hard, clear light, and St. Jude's parish office smelled of dust, ink, and damp wool, drying too fast by the grate. The magistrate sat at a narrow table with 2 clerks. Ashford stood to one side in plain dark coat, no ceremonial ribbon, only a black cravat and exhaustion carved under his eyes. Christine stood as deponent and watched the process she had once only copied in margins. Aurelia entered her statement freely. Marcella, summoned separately, repeated what she had whispered in the aisle. She had seen Lady Whitcomb scrape and rewrite Aurelia's age declaration by candle after midnight. Mr. Gresham confirmed timing. The clerk confirmed notation mismatch. Mrs. Davies confirmed pressure in the vestry. The physician confirmed Thomas Reed's injury and Christine's field dressing as competent and necessary. No thread was left loose. Each was tied to paper, witness, and seal. At noon, the magistrate read judgment in that same room. The prior ceremony entered under materially false declaration is void for fraud and coercion. Lady Whitcomb is remanded pending sentencing on forgery and coercive fraud charges. Property transfers attached to disputed instruments are stayed. Lady Aurelia Whitcomb is placed under temporary legal protection with independent counsel. Miss Christine Kowalski's extracts are admitted as credible supporting record. Certified copies will be lodged with the court archive and originals returned upon request. He looked up at Christine. Do you request return or archive? She thought of the flower chest, the attic cold, the years bent over candle stubs, preserving numbers no one wished to read. Archive the originals, sir. Give me certified copies. So entered. 3 days later, Christine crossed the courtyard infirmary with a basket. Mrs. Davies had packed without comment. Broth, bread, clean bandaged linen. Thomas Reed sat up on a narrow cot, arms splintered properly now, temples stitched and healing. He flushed when he saw her. Miss Kowalski, they said you were the one. They said too much. She set the basket down. How is the arm? Hurts when I boast. He attempted a grin and failed. Physician says 6 weeks. He hesitated. The boy from choir asked after you. He keeps telling everyone you ordered the whole cathedral. She nearly smiled. Then he is inventing. From the doorway, Ashford's voice came, clipped as ever. Not inventing, compressing. She turned. He had come without retinue, hat in hand, the scar at his temple pale in afternoon light. For a moment none of them spoke. Thomas, sensing rank and private weather both, looked at his blanket and concentrated on bread. On the 2nd week of September, sentencing was read at the Old Bailey Annex before a crowded public gallery that had once watched Christine scrub mud from marble and now watched Lady Whitcomb hear years assigned for forgery, coercive fraud, and false sworn declaration. No one cheered. The judge did not raise his voice. Law had no need to shout when it was finally obeyed. Aurelia left London that evening under court protection to stay with her widowed aunt in Bath. Before she departed, she came to the carriage yard in plain blue wool, no jewels, no powder, only tired eyes and steadier hands. I will not ask you to forgive quickly, she said. I will ask to earn correspondence. Christine adjusted the travelling rug over Aurelia's knees. Write truth. I can answer truth. Aurelia nodded once, and the carriage rolled away. By Michaelmas, the leaves in Ashford Square had turned copper at the edges, and the morning of the wedding broke cold and bright. No rain, no crowd pressed for spectacle. St. Jude's side chapel held only 6 witnesses. Mrs. Davies in dark serge with gloved hands folded tight, Mr. Gresham in his best worn coat, Thomas Reed with his arm newly out of splint, the magistrate as legal witness, the registrar, and Aurelia returned for 1 day with her aunt's escort and standing quiet in the back pew. Christine wore a gown of deep grey-blue wool and her mother's ivory comb at the nape of her dark hair. The repaired prong held. Her hands still bore faint ridges where lie and winter had split them, but they did not shake. Ashford waited at the rail in black coat and white cravat, broad shoulders set as if facing weather. When she reached him, he looked at her hands first, then her face. The priest opened the book. My lord, do you enter this vow freely and with full understanding? I do. Miss Kowalski, do you enter this vow freely and with full understanding?" She held the sound of those words for one measured breath. Freely, full understanding, nothing hidden, nothing scraped and rewritten in the margin. "I do." They spoke the vows in plain form. No grand declarations, no theatre. When the priest asked for signatures, the registrar turned the book toward her with no hesitation and no substitution. Christine signed her own name in a steady legal hand that matched the court copies and her father's old instruction both. Ashford signed beneath it. Aurelia signed as witness. Mrs. Davies signed after her, jaw set, as if daring anyone to challenge the ink. When the final blessing ended, the chapel remained quiet, except for distant bells, and Thomas Reed's uneven attempt not to cry in public. Ashford offered Christine his arm. She took it. They stepped down from the rail together. At the chapel door he stopped, turned slightly, and spoke low enough that only she could hear, though his eyes never left hers. "Will you let me make honest vows this time?" She answered without lowering her gaze. "You already did." They walked out into Michaelmas light, and every promise between them had a witness, a record, and the weight to stand.